Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 11. This is day 2 for econ, and we're going to be doing the standard of living project today. Okay, so if you're watching this in class, just heads up as I go through the project, the sub is going to need to pause this as I go through and give you time to work on some of the parts. And also, if you're watching this back, if you weren't in class and you're watching this back to do the project, I'm going to go through it kind of quickly, and then what you'll need to do is you'll need to stop and complete each section as we go through. But I'm recording this after school. I'm trying to get ahead and stuff, so I won't have long pauses as we go through that. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're going through, okay? So we are going to be in Module 9, Lesson 7, and we're going to be working on standard of living projects. So kind of looking at globalization and how this interconnectedness and what is standard of living. And it's kind of two parts. It's income, but it's also quality of life. So some of it is very literal and some it's subjective. You know, how do you define quality of life, healthcare, happiness, appropriate housing? People are going to have different standards. Then you also have things that are very concrete, like how much money you actually need to make in order to pay for a place to live, how much food's going to cost, transportation, and those kinds of things. So standard of living is both concrete, but it is also, depending on where you live, you'll see different measures, but it's concrete, but also then quality of life that maybe helps us determine some aspects of standard of living can also be subjective. So big question. Hopefully you finished both EverFis, right? Key to Investing and Investment Game. We did those in day 1 of this week. If you haven't finished those, you need to get those in, okay? So make sure you get those done, get those in. Make sure you submit the screenshot of the final assessment, your name, and then you can see, make sure that we can see that example. And here was the example of what that needs to look like, okay? So just make sure that you get that in. Those are both for summative points. So big deal. Okay. So I want you to think for a second, like standard of living in not just America, but we all know that different parts of America cost more or less to live. If you live in New York City versus if you live in rural Mississippi, you know, very different standards for how much money it would take to live. So thinking about like Las Vegas Valley. So if you live in Vegas or North Vegas, or Henderson, Boulder City, you know, somewhere in the valley. Okay. How much do you think you would need in order to move out? You know, a lot of you are seniors. You could be moving out here in the next bit. Maybe you're going to stay home for a while, but how much would you actually need to make in order to move out? Think about that for a second. Paying rent, assuming you probably had a roommate. Are you going to have a car payment, insurance, utilities, food, miscellaneous, fund money, savings? Going to add up really, really quick. Okay. So one of the good things about this project is starting to realize that, you know, standard of living, like what is that? How much does that actually take? And then comparing it in different parts of the world. Okay. So this project isn't just about the United States, but it's an opportunity to compare us to other parts of the world. So we're going to continue with the same standards, looking at supply, demand, costs of goods, currency, all these things, trade that impact standard of living. Okay. One wage in one country might be more than enough to get by versus another wage in another country. So again, every country we might hear, you know, $500 a month is the average wage, let's say in a country. And we're like, are you kidding me? Like that would never be enough here. But maybe in an underdeveloped or developing country, maybe that's plenty to get by. So you also have to remember that a lot of this can be subjective. Okay, so the way that this project's going to go is as we work through each part, I have some important links. So I'll show you where you can find these if you're watching this back. If the sub is showing you this, then they're going to help provide you these links, and I'll show them as we go through it. But if you're watching this back, then you're going to need to go to the lesson and recording page, and you can find this PowerPoint with these links linked above this video, okay? But first, let's get our worksheet open, and then I'll show you where you can find this PowerPoint with these links that you're going to use to help you in the video and also going through the project, okay? So we're going to go to modules, and we're going to go to Module 9, Lesson 7. Okay, and we're going to click under Module 9, Lesson 7, Standard of Living Project. And there is our document. Okay, so we're going to click on it. Make a copy. So as always, we are going to save this to our drive. We are going to make it shareable. So anyone with the links that when you turn it in, I can grade it, okay? Or your teacher can grade it. Okay, so once you have that open and ready, we're going to go back over into Canvas, and then I want to show you really quick. So if you are watching this in class, then like I said, these links will be provided to you in the chat as you go through. The sub has the links that are listed in the PowerPoint. But if you're watching this back or after class, maybe you weren't able to get them in class or it was going too fast, then you're going to go to the lesson and recording page, and you're going to go to week 11. And you're going to scroll down to where you find the videos. So there's the video link for the first day. This will be linked once I'm done with this video for the second day. Here's the PowerPoint with the links, okay? So the same PowerPoint that I'm using here that's going to have links for each part of the project, that's where as I go through them, you can find those links in this PowerPoint, okay, right there. So that's where you can find it, all right? So make note of that. That's where you can find it. All right, let's get started, okay? So standard of living project, let's listen to or look at the directions. The standard of living in countries is not solely determined by real GDP or gross domestic production, or even GDP per capita, by analyzing a variety of indicators. So many things determine standard of living, okay? Such as ones we've discussed. We can get a fuller picture of what the standard of living looks like in a variety of countries. Your task is to develop a list of indicators that will reveal a broader range of data so that you can determine your case study country's true standard of living. All right. So that might sound like a lot, but we're going to go through it step by step. Okay. And again, as I go through it and I say, okay, now pause this for 5 minutes and work on this, the teacher in class can pause it, or you can pause it if you're doing it on your own. All right. So here we go. You're going to choose 3 countries in different regions around the world. So this part's really, really important, okay, to make sure that you're choosing 3 different countries in different parts of the world, okay? You're going to want to pick one country that's in a developed nation. So a country that is well established, like United States, Canada, Western Europe, Australia, a lot of those kind of countries, okay? You're going to want to pick one underdeveloped country, and then you're going to want to pick one developing country. Now, I'm going to show you an intro video and things like that, and then I'll give you some options of how to choose these countries and how to know which is which. All right, so here we go. So what is or defining standard of living? Let's watch this quick video.
T-Mobile 5G home internet's slowing you down when everyone's connected? Why deal with that?
Hey everyone, it's Mr. McCluskey back again with another video, and today we're going to be looking at what the definition and meaning of standard of living is. We're going to look at the couple key words that relate to it, how do we determine it. You know, I'm actually pretty excited about this lesson, and I'm really hoping you guys are too.
Oh, you can stay, but I'm leaving.
Okay. Not that excited, so but we still have to do this lesson, so let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, so what is standard of living? Well, according to the internet, it says it is the level of wealth, comfort, material goods, and necessities available to certain socio-economic class or a certain geographic area.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Okay, it might seem pretty complicated, but it's not. To make this easier, we're going to simplify this down a little bit. So what standard living is, it's the quality of life in a country based on 3 factors. And those factors are GDP per capita, literacy rate, and life expectancy. So what is GDP per capita? Well, before we understand what GDP per capita is, we really need to take a look at what GDP means. And GDP is short for gross domestic product. And we don't mean gross in the sense of when I was in elementary school and I threw up over like 7 kids who were sitting in front of me. Yeah, not like that gross. We mean in the sense of total. Gross means total in this case. To keep it simple, GDP is basically the wealth of a country. How much money a country makes through goods and services in a year. Now that we understand what GDP is, let's take a look at GDP per capita. Now, GDP per capita is the average amount of money a person will make in a year within a country.
Good morning, my darlings. You're coming home with me.
GDP per capita is basically considered the average income of a person in a country. The next factor is literacy rate. Now, literacy rate is the percentage of the population that's over the age of 15 that can read and write within a certain country. Now, when you come across these numbers, you're going to see numbers in the 90s, and then you might see them below 90. A lot of these countries that you see that might have low literacy rates might have different roadblocks to promoting education, the access to get an education, or the ability for families to allow their children to go to school. You know, sometimes in some places, you do have it where children need to work in order to be able to bring home an income for families. And the last factor we're going to talk about is life expectancy. Now, life expectancy is simply how long the average life will be within a country. How old the average person will live to be. And that's it. That's all the factors of the standard of living. I'm hoping that part was pretty easy.
Yes!
Good. But let's not get too excited. We do have one more thing to go over.
Please, no! 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 No!
Yeah, we got to look at how do we determine a standard of living using the GDP, literacy rate, and life expectancy. So let's go ahead and get into that. Okay, so let's make this quick. So how do we determine standard of living? Well, the first thing we need to do is look at the chart. As we look at the chart, you will see that you have a list of countries, then you have categories of GDP per capita, life expectancy, and literacy rate. Now, if you look at each one of these, what you will do is you're going to rank each country based on each category. So let's start with GDP per capita. You look at that category and you try to find who has the highest. According to this, the country that has the highest is Japan. So next to that number at 46,831, you would put a 1. Then the second country that's closest is the United States. The third would be Russia. And finally, Mali would be in 4th place in this. Then you do the same thing for life expectancy. Find the highest and then rank them from highest to lowest, going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you do the same thing with literacy rate. Now, sometimes you'll actually have it where countries will be the exact same. They might tie, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But as you go through this, you're going to end up having 3 numbers. You add those 3 numbers up, and they're going to give you a raw score, and that's how you rank them. The lowest raw score is the country that has the highest standard of living. The highest raw score is the country that has the worst standard of living. And that's it. That's everything you need to know about standard of living for this lesson. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Comment below, let me know, thumbs up if you like it, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
Okay, you can see really quick through that video, just a good overview then of how is standard of living determined, okay? How is standard of living determined? So it's GDP, gross domestic product, literacy rates, and standard of living, okay? Or I'm sorry, and life expectancy. So we're going to incorporate these and a few others by looking at examples of different countries to help understand a broader scope of standard of living, okay? So now that we have our worksheet open, all right, you should have your worksheet open. This one is mine, all right? It's got a few extra links and things in it, but you have it open. So let's get started, all right? So number 1, we're going to choose 3 countries in different regions around the world to study. Try to choose one at least from one developed country, one underdeveloped country, and one developing country, okay? So this is where having the PowerPoint is going to be really helpful, okay? And stuff. So what you need to do, all right, is you are going to, using the PowerPoint or your the sub that's with you, They're going to put these in the chat for you. Okay, so once I go through the instructions, throw these in the chat and then take about 5 minutes and you're going to pick one from each one. So let's take a look at developed countries. So what you're going to do is you need to pick 3 countries. Okay, so you need to pick a developed, developing, less developed. Okay, and you can type those in and stuff to make sure, because I know that yours is blank. So go ahead and type in developed, developing, underdeveloped, just like I have here. And then you're going to pick one developing country from the first link, or one developed. Okay, so it's going to be the highest level countries, the most industrialized, highest standard of living, life expectancy, literacy, all those things, GDP. Okay, by looking at your first link. So let's look at our first link. All right, so let's look at developed countries. If you're watching this back, then this is where you'd want to go and get that PowerPoint open. Okay, so we can see here anything in the darker blue or darkest blue is going to be considered a developed country. Okay, so you've got Canada, States, you've got, parts of Western Europe, Australia, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, so really any country so you can click on them. Let me see if I click on them, does it do anything? It just kind of highlights which one. Okay, so pick any country for your first one developed that is in this kind of darker blues. Okay, darker blues. So let's say we picked Australia. All right, and you can pick that one if you want, or you could pick a different one. So let's say we picked Australia. Okay. Now, if you need more time, then you could pause the video or you could keep going. Okay, now we're going to look for our next, which is developing, which means they haven't reached the status of GDP, life expectancy, literacy, all those kind of things that the developed nations have, but they're getting there. They're in transition. Okay, so let's take a look at those countries. So developing, okay, and this kind of gives you a list of countries that are in transition. Some of these I don't necessarily agree with. This list is a little bit older. Like Afghanistan is actually taking a step back due to change in regime. So I would not consider them developing. They were at one point, but with government changes and corruption and terrorism, things like that, Afghanistan unfortunately has gone backward. But there is a huge list that you can choose from, okay? And again, the sub can throw this link in the chat. So this is the second link I'm working off of right here, developing countries. Okay, so we've got Bangladesh, we have Belize, we've got Bolivia, Brazil, Cambodia. So Brazil, that's in South America, Cambodia in Southeast Asia, Chile in Southeast Asia, China in East Asia, Colombia, Congo Republic. So these are some countries in Africa. Dominican Republic. So that's in the Caribbean. Egypt in North Africa. Ethiopia. Gambia. Guatemala. I mean, Haiti. There's so many. So you could go through, pick one that sounds good to you. Let's say I'm going to pick Madagascar. I'm just randomly picking. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to pick Madagascar. Okay. And again, if you need more time, then you could pause this, but I am going to keep going for now. Okay. Now we need to find a less developed. So this is going to be the most underdeveloped, impoverished, or lacking infrastructure, low GDP, lower literacy, lower life expectancy. Okay. All right, so we're going to find this third link here. So again, the sub can throw this link in the chat. If you're watching this back, then you can find this in the PowerPoint that's on that lesson and recording page. Okay. So this is the UN list of the least developed countries in the world. So you can see a lot of them are concentrated in very specific areas. So we have a few throughout Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Laos, Nepal, Afghanistan. Again, like I said, some of the Afghanistan that other list. Some of those I don't agree with, especially if you look more up to date in the last couple of years. Let's see, quite a few parts of Africa. So Mali, Niger, Chad, Sudan, Uganda, Ethiopia, Gambia, Sierra Leone, like Central African Republic, Zambia, quite a few. So again, pick one. I also like the idea of trying to pick different locations around the world. You know what I mean? So trying to don't pick all your developed, less developed, underdeveloped, all from Asia or all from Africa, trying to like pick off of different continents if you can. So I believe I chose Madagascar. So see, they show that here. So Australia. So let's do Cambodia. Okay, let's do Cambodia. Or at least that's the one I'm going to do. Okay. So I'm going to go over here, Cambodia. Again, just trying to pick different areas of the world to make it a little bit more interesting and diverse. Okay. So if you need more time, go ahead and pause. Otherwise, then we'll continue. Okay. So the next thing we need to do, all right, is let's read what number 2 is asking, and then there's a short video we'll watch. Choose 4 different indicators that you think would be important in measuring the country's standard of living. The first one of your indicator is going to be GDP per capita. Okay, so you have to pick GDP per capita. Some others to think about would be education, literacy rates, unemployment rates, healthcare, income gaps, birth rates, infrastructure. Okay, so these are some other options that you could choose for your indicators. And whatever indicators you choose, you're going to use them for the same indicators for every single country. So one is for sure chosen for you, GDP per capita, and then you need to come up with 4 more. Okay. I personally love education literacy. I think that's very telling. What percentage of the population, birth rate is important, and average life expectancy. You don't have to choose these. And again, here's this list you could choose from: education, literacy, unemployment rates. The lower the unemployment, usually the more developed or the better off the country. The higher the unemployment rates, usually that means a lower standard of living because more people are impoverished. It's hard to find work. So that infrastructure, that's buildings. Do they have a lot of hospitals? Do they have freeways, highways? So infrastructure is talking about like buildings. Do they have a lot of skyscrapers, freeways, hospitals, paved roads, those kinds of things? Or is it more rural? Is it a lot of dirt roads? Is there a lack of buildings, large urban cities? A lot of underdeveloped countries, for example, some in Africa, you're not going to see a lot of great roads. You're not going to see a lot of great hospitals. You're not going to see a lot of skyscrapers. You're not going to see a lot of infrastructure. That usually means a lower standard of living, or when you do see that, you tend to see a higher standard of living. So you're going to pick 5. 1 is already given to you, which is GDP per capita. So you need to pick 4 more. You're welcome to use these, or you can use different ones. And these are ideas off this list. So while you choose that, I'm going to show you a quick video. So while you choose off this list, think about education, literacy, unemployment, healthcare, income gaps, birth rates. So for healthcare, do they have healthcare systems? Do they have universal healthcare? Is health insurance provided, or is it scarce? So starting to kind of think about that. We'll look at this link here in a second. I just want to show you a quick video on indicators.
Is real GDP per capita a good measure of the standard of living? People tell me all the time, you economists, you're too materialistic. Doesn't real GDP per capita just measure the things we buy? What about our health, our happiness, education? Well, real GDP per capita, it's not a perfect measure, but I want to show you why it's probably the best single measure of the average standard of living in a country. And that's not because material goods are the most important goods. It's because real GDP per capita is correlated with many of the other things that we care about. Let's start with life expectancy. Here we show real GDP per capita along the horizontal axis and life expectancy along the vertical axis. As you can see, there's a positive correlation. Countries that have a higher GDP per capita also have a higher life expectancy. Perhaps that's not too surprising. Let's take a look at happiness. Maybe this is a more surprising fact. This chart shows GDP per capita on the horizontal axis, and now a measure of happiness on the vertical axis. Again, we see a positive correlation. Countries with a higher real GDP per capita also tend to have happier people, on average. Here's a data set from the United Nations. It's called the Human Development Index. It combines measures of life expectancy, education, and standard of living. Overall, you can see, in general, as GDP per capita increases, so does human development, at least as measured by this index. The basic story, it's pretty simple. When we have more goods and services, we can usually afford more of the other good things in life. So the good things in life, they tend to go together. However, GDP per capita is far from perfect. Here's one problem. GDP per capita misses the distribution of income. For example, let's compare the real GDP per capita of Nigeria, Pakistan, and Honduras. It's actually pretty similar. So you might think that all three countries have similar living standards. And yet in Nigeria, about 80% of the population lives on less than $2 a day. In Pakistan, it's only 60%. In Honduras, it's only 33%. How can the number of people living in abject poverty be so different when real GDP per capita is about the same? The reason is that income in Nigeria is much more unequally distributed than in Pakistan or Honduras. Nigeria has many poor people, but also some very rich people. So average income, it's about the same in Nigeria, Pakistan, or Honduras, even though there are more poor people in Nigeria. Over time, however, growth in real GDP per capita, whether in Nigeria, Pakistan, or Honduras, usually does indicate growth in everyone's incomes, including the incomes of the very poor. So this graph shows growth in per capita incomes along the horizontal axis, with growth in the incomes of the poorest 20% on the vertical axis. Once again, you see, as average per capita income increases, you also see increases in income of the very poor. Overall, real GDP and real GDP per capita have proven to be useful measures for comparing the standard of living of two different countries or for comparing the same country at different points in time. Okay, so now that you know that real GDP per capita, it's a good measure of the standard of living, we get to the really crucial question. How do we increase the standard of living? How do we grow an economy? How do we increase real GDP per capita? That is a big question, the big question of development. We'll be tackling it in a number of future videos. But before you go, take a moment to let us know how we're doing. What do you think?
Okay, so I like this video because it helps you understand why we're requiring when you're going to look up your three countries you chose, okay? One developed, one developing, one underdeveloped. Why GDP per capita is the best indicator. It's an easy thing to Google. It's the best indicator of standard of living, but also it's important to have these other indicators, or at least gives you more insight when you see a low GDP and then you look up life expectancy, birth rates, or education rates, things like that. It starts to make sense. You're like, oh, because a lot of countries with low GDP tend to have lower literacy rates, tend to have less healthcare, lower life expectancy. Countries with higher GDP tend to have higher literacy, more healthcare, higher, like they tend to correspond. Not always 100%, but there tends to be a correlation. So let's jump back over, okay? And we're going to look at number 2, okay? So now for number 2, what you need to do is you need to choose what other 4 indicators are you going to look up for each country to then compare so that you, again, kind of start to see, okay, I know this country's developed, developing, underdeveloped. So all the way mid-range, the most impoverished. But then by seeing the numbers in the same categories, the education rates or the literacy rates or the unemployment rates or the average life expectancy. So I could add that to this actually list really quick. So life expectancy. There we go. That's going to be really helpful when you comparing and doing a compare contrast of these three countries that you selected in part 1. So pick from that list. And again, per capita has been pre-chosen for you. So you have to do per capita. I think literacy is a great one. Birth rate's a great one. Average life expectancy is a great one. Healthcare is also a really interesting one because you look at what kind of healthcare system do they have or lack thereof. Do they have universal healthcare? That tends to be a developed nation infrastructure. Do they have private insurance? Do they not have a healthcare system? Is it all privatized? Do they have, like how accessible is healthcare? That can be a really good indicator. Unemployment can be a great one. Again, the lower the unemployment, usually the more developed. The higher the unemployment, usually the higher rates of poverty, less developed. Okay, I'm going to move on, but if you need more time, go ahead and pause this video, or if you're in class, have the sub go ahead and pause this maybe for 5 minutes and give people a couple minutes to pick 4. So remember, you have to keep GDP per capita. So you have to keep this first one, and then you pick 4 others, okay? And you can pick anything off this list, okay? And when I say health, I mean healthcare, okay? So anything off this list because you're going to be Googling and looking that up, okay? This link can also be really helpful, okay? What does standard of living mean? Or how do we measure standard of living? Okay, and helps us just kind of understand a history and a background of that. And again, the most important thing being GDP per capita, but also finding other indicators that can help toward that. So pick from that list 4, and then you're going to put them here in number 2, task 2. Then before you move on, you're going to briefly explain why you chose each one. What is it about education or literacy rate you think could be helpful? What is it about birth rate that you think could be really helpful? So you're welcome, if you choose these same indicators, you're welcome to use these responses. So I'll go over some examples of what I mean. So you can see for the second one, I chose education literacy. So for education literacy, I said the reason that I chose this, or I feel like this could be helpful in understanding standard of living in a country and comparing that. This shows the number or the rate of families who depend on child labor to support a household, okay, or not, or can afford to send their children to school. So like here, school is required. Your parents don't even have a choice. You have to go to school, okay? Whether it's private, homeschool, public school, you have to go to school through high school, right? You have to get educated. So that is a sign of a developed nation. That's a sign of a wealthy nation overall. Now, it doesn't mean you maybe individually are wealthy, but as a nation, that there's a higher standard of living because, one, education is provided and it's required. Many countries, though, that are developing or underdeveloped, education is not required. Education is optional. Maybe you even have to pay for it. Maybe there is no public education. So education rates can be a really good indicator of wealth within a nation or struggling within a nation, especially when families can't afford to send their children to school because they rely on them for labor to help support the family. Birth rate can be a really good indicator too. This can be cultural, but also access to contraceptives. So birth rates can be a really interesting. Developed nations tend to be culturally more liberal, socially more liberal, more accepting of interventions such as birth control, abortion, limiting pregnancy. Also, usually that means access to healthcare. On the flip, when you have high birth rates, that can mean a lack of access to medical intervention. So maybe lack of access to birth control or abortions or things like that. Or also maybe, or maybe lack of cultural acceptance. So maybe culturally or socially, it's frowned upon for women to be on birth control. It's frowned upon for abortion. So we see this in a lot of underdeveloped nations. We see this in parts of Africa, the Middle East, where it's very frowned upon culturally for women to be on birth control or to prevent pregnancy, that it's considered a status symbol to have more children. So those can be other indicators of how developed or wealthy a nation is. So usually the lower the birth rate, the more wealthy or higher GDP or developed that nation is. Higher birth rate usually means more impoverished, lower GDP. You could do unemployment. You could talk about how this can be a helpful indicator of, again, how many jobs are available. Is it really hard to find a job, or is it easy to find a job? Low unemployment can be a sign of a very healthy nation. High unemployment is a sign of poverty. It's a poor economy. Life expectancy, that can be really interesting, right? Because of it's a sign of food quality, healthcare, right? How accessible is healthcare to prevent or treat illnesses or diseases? Food quality, if you can barely get by, then maybe you don't have a lot of food variety. If you have better income, then you have the ability or access to more food, better foods. So quickly, just kind of talking about why each indicator that you chose can be helpful. So I can help you with one more. So let's do life expectancy. Oops. Okay, can show access or limits in healthcare or illness, and also food quality and accessibility. Oh, I know I misspelled that. Accessibility. Okay. So you're giving, again, an explanation. Why do you think your indicator is going to help show, besides GDP, how high or low the standard of living is? Okay. So you can pause this if you need more time, or you could have this pause this for about 5 minutes. Okay. And then we're going to move on to the research part, because this is the part that's going to take the longest. All right. So go ahead and pause this. Give it about 5 minutes. Let the class finish, and then restart this. Or if you're watching this back, pause this till you finish this section and then move on. All right. I'm going to move on now. And we're going to move on to part 3. Okay. So part 3 is understanding and researching your 5 indicators, okay, which is going to take a little time with each country, okay? But first, let's watch this quick standard of living video for part 3.
Countries all seek to offer improved standards of living as an indication of progress and economic advancement. With higher standards of living in a country, its citizens are seen to be better off. The practice is to equate the standard of living or the welfare of an average citizen in a country to the real GDP per capita of a country. The higher a country's real GDP per capita, the higher the standard of living of the citizen. However, economists are flaking out more problems and using real GDP per capita as a gauge of standard of living. By using real GDP per capita that tracks the level of production in a country, we're saying that a person's welfare is only dependent on the amount of goods and services that he can have access to based on how much is produced. Though the amount of goods that one can have access to is an important determinant of standard of living, i.e. the material or the quantitative aspect of standard of living, there is another important aspect of standard of living: the non-material or the qualitative aspect that needs to be considered. So the traditional GDP measure lacks in assessing the qualitative aspect of a country's standard of living, which includes such aspects as infant mortality rates and the number of doctors available per person. Besides the inadequacy of GDP figures for assessing the non-material aspects of standard of living, GDP must be used carefully in concluding about material standards of living. Though real GDP figures may have increased, this only shows higher levels of production, yet material standards of living hinges on greater amounts of goods consumed and not just produced. When real GDP increases due to better tracking of economic activity, with better tax reporting structures, or with more paid services compared to DIY activities, real GDP increases since more production is now recorded, though the amount of goods consumed may not have risen. This overestimates standard of living. When real GDP is bumped up due to increased spending on restoring an economy wiped out by natural disaster, GDP overestimates standard of living. More exports produced bumps up a country's GDP figures too, yet the increased production is shipped overseas and not made available for domestic consumption. Using real GDP per capita alone to make deductions about standard of living that is affected by so many qualitative factors makes the indicator highly insufficient. Hence, more comprehensive measures, such as the Human Development Index, is used.
Okay, so this is helping us understand that as we look into the 3 countries we chose in task 1 and the 5 indicators in task 2, okay, now we're going to actually research and go and find the data. Okay, I'm going to take you through an example one, okay? So you're going to fill in each question and use the same indicators for each one. You're going to Google research each indicator. So this is where this is going to take you some time. This could take 20 to 30 minutes in class, or if you're doing this on your own, that where you're going to want to pause the video and work on that. But I'll help you get it set up because you're going to do the same 5 indicators for each of the 3 countries that you chose, okay? So for example, I chose an example country, Brazil, okay? And this is a developing country, okay? So I think up here I chose 3. So for developing, I put Madagascar. Let's change that to Brazil. I forgot that I chose a different example. Okay, so let's say for Brazil. All right, and you're welcome to do this one with me if you would like, and then you would do your other 2, whatever you chose for developed, whatever you chose for less developed. Okay, so what I do is you're going to see in part 3, the task is to research the country and the 5 indicators. So taking parts from task 1, the 3 different countries, and the indicators from task 2. Okay, those 5 indicators, and you're going to do it for each country. So for example, Brazil, okay, which is developing. So you want to say not only the name of the country, but is it the developed country, developing, or underdeveloped? And remember, you need 1 from each category. So do not turn this in with United States, Canada, and Australia. Those are all developed, so you will lose a lot of points, okay? So you need 1 from each category, which we did in part 1. And we used these links, right, to look those up. So you can also find those on the lesson recording page if you need to go back and do that. Okay, so I'm going to do Brazil. I'm going to put developing. You're welcome to do this with me if you would want. This is our developing, so this would be our example of our mid-range country, okay? So not quite as well off, but not quite in poverty. So kind of somewhere in the middle, rising through it, okay? Has some infrastructure, has decent standard of living, has healthcare, but maybe not universal, maybe not everywhere. It's something that's being worked on. Okay, so my first indicator I chose was, everybody has to do is GDP per capita. So what you're going to do is you can literally go to Google and you can just type it in. Brazil GDP per capita 2023. And it's literally going to pop up. Okay. So in 2023, Brazilian, okay, so GDP. No, I want Brazil's GDP. So Brazil's GDP, let's see what it says here. And sometimes you have to go to a couple links, or you got to look a little bit. Okay, so Brazil's current GDP per capita 2022 was 8,917. So 8,917. So let's go back over here. Let's see if this needs to be updated. Okay, so 8,917 US dollars. And this is 2022. So you want to make sure that you put on the year. Okay, so sometimes, as long as you can find it within, let's say, 3 years. Okay, sometimes it's hard to find it like the exact year. So the GDP per capita, all right, for this country, for Brazil, which this whole chart is about, it's going to be 8,971. Why is Brazil's GDP so high? So industry. They have advanced industries in petroleum, automotive. So now you need to look up, why, what's inputting into that. So what I can do is I can Google that. So I inserted the number here, put the year. So make sure you put the year for all of your data that you're going to use. Okay. And then I'm going to look up, or I'm going to Google what is impacting or creating their GDP, their income. Okay. How does this country make money? So I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to Google. And again, you're going to do this with all of these. Okay. So this is where it's going to take a little bit of time. You got to do a little research. This is the part where you got to use those typing skills. Okay. So I'm going to put Brazil's GDP comes from what industry? Okay. And okay, so Brazil's GDP strength, largely based on exports of raw commodities such as soybeans, sugarcane, coffee, iron, and crude petroleum. So I took that and I put it right here. So petroleum, automotive, cement, iron, steel, chemical, aerospace. So I found this off a different site, but you could literally just pull it right there and you could copy and paste that if you wanted. Okay, so talking about, so what you could see down here, what are the major industries? So you could kind of pop down the series of indicators, largest industry, 58.9% of GDP, agricultural industries, substantial growth. Yeah, that doesn't really help. Come from agriculture. Here they break it down a little bit. Services, industry, agriculture. What are the 3 largest industries in Brazil? Consumer durability, steel and petrochemicals, aircraft and computers. So that's really interesting. Okay, so it's like what is causing the income in Brazil? Okay, so and then you could put that here. And you're going to do that for each country. Okay, then we're going to go to our next one, education rates. All right, so what are the education rates? So meaning literacy rates, right? So I'm pulling again these indicators from number 2, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and I'm putting those in the chart 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and then I'm looking up each one. And I'm going to do that for every single country. So I'm going to list let's say I did Australia and I did my developed per capita. I would do education. I would do, what did I do next? Life expectancy. Then I would do birth rate, and then I would do unemployment. And you're looking up the same things for each country. Okay, so education literacy rates. So I'm going to go to Google again. And I'm going to put literacy rates Brazil. See, 2023. Let's see what we get. What is the literacy rates in Brazil? Showing 94.6%. So it's pretty high. Okay, so it's pretty high. All right, so I'm going to replace this. I'm going to say 2023, 90, what did I say it was? 94%. So 94%. So I'm going to put it over here. 2023 stats show 94%. Okay. So again, make sure you're giving the year of your stats, and you want to be within 3 years. Okay. All right. Then we'll do life expectancy. So Brazil life expectancy. So according to 2020, it's going to be 74. Okay, so we're going to go with that. That looks like it's the most current that we've got here. Okay, and it compares like United States according to 2020. It's sometimes they don't come out with these like every year. So you can see that Mexico's a little lower, United States a little higher. Okay, so 2020, 74 years old. Okay, so 2020, 74 years old. So birth rate, what's the average per, female? Like what's the average? How many children is she likely to have over her ability or those years that she's able to have children, okay, or to birth children? So let's take a look. So Brazil, birth rates, 2023. Okay. So the current birth rate is 12.8, 12.5 per 1,000 people. The birth rate was 12, it's declined 1.76%. They're going to tell us per person. Just a minute. So sometimes you have to kind of click through. You have to click through the sources. Here we go. The current fertility rates is 1.65 births per woman. Okay, so it's declined 0.66% from 20. So birth rates are going down. So you can see 2023, it was 1.66, 2022, 1.68. Doesn't look like much, but it is slowly going down, which is concerning for countries that are trying to develop. A lot of the Western world is suffering that. The birth rates, Japan's a great example. When the elder population gets so large and represents more than the younger population, it becomes imbalanced. Usually you want the older population to be the smallest portion, and then it's like a triangle as it goes down, right? The population, the age of the population gets larger. And that's not happening in a lot of countries right now. Okay, so 1.6, let me revisit that. It was 1.657. 57 in 2024, declining. Okay, so declining. All right. Then let's take a look at, so again, I want to put a year with each stat. You can see I'm doing that. And then let's look at unemployment. Okay, so same thing. So you're going to do this with each country. So I'm doing one country with you, which you're welcome to do. And then you can do it for your other two. Okay, so Brazil, unemployment rates. Let's see if we can get 2024. Okay, 7.6% unemployment. All right, so this is as of January 2024, so very, very recent. So last I looked in February when I did this project last year, in February of 2023, it was 8.6, so it's actually gotten better. So again, the lower the unemployment, the better off for the country. The higher the unemployment, usually the lower GDP or the lower standard of living. The lower the unemployment, the higher standard of living, usually. And this kind of makes sense because this is, Brazil is considered developing, right? It's not impoverished, but it's not quite high, it's not quite in the developed category yet. So it's getting better. And we can see that with as the unemployment rate declines, that's a sign that the quality or standard of living is going up slowly but surely. All right. So this is a great indicator. So 7.6% in January 2024. Okay. So again, making sure that you're giving me a stat, at least within the last couple years. Okay. So we did one together. If you choose to use this one, you're welcome to if you want. Okay. So then you would take, and then this is where you're going to want to pause the video again. You would take one of your developed countries. So let's say you did Australia. You could do a different one. I'm not going to fill this out with you, but you would put Australia here, developed. Okay. And then I would do my indicators. So I had GDP, and then I would put literacy. Then I would put life expectancy. Then I would put birth rate. Then I would put unemployment. Okay, and it's going to be the same ones. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to Google it. So last one I'm going to help you with. Okay, so let's say you did Australia. You literally just Australia GDP per capita. Let's do 2023. Let's see what we got. GDP right now. Okay, so we want, this number is not correct. So that we want like total per capita. Let's see here. Let me try it. Real GDP per capita. Let's see. GDP, Australia. Let's see what we get. Okay, so it's doing really well. Okay, so per person, per capita, which would be per person, that was 2016, which would be 49,875 US dollars in Australia. Okay, overall, they are 1.5 trillion. So let's see if we can find more recent. The growth rate per person. Here we go. 2022, here we go, has reached an all-time high in 2022, $51,090 US dollars. Okay, so they do a lot of them US dollars, so it's comparable. All right, so 2022, which was 51,000. $51,090. So 090 and USD, and that's US dollars. And the reason we want to do all of them in US dollars, because see up here we said 8,900. So you can see the big difference, right? Brazil is developing 8,900 US dollars was the average per capita. So per person in US dollars income. In Australia, what's the average income, gross domestic production per person, average? Comparing it to US dollars, so apples to apples. Because if it's all these different currencies, then we don't know, right? The exchange rate. So that's why you want to do US dollars, okay? We can see it's 51,000. Then I would look up literacy. So Australia. So comparing US dollar to US dollar is really, really helpful, okay? So like literacy. Literacy rates, 2023. 99%. Okay, 99%. So 2023, pretty much everybody can. It's about as high as you can get. It's hard to be at 100%. 99% literacy. So that means reading, writing, like past, like at high school level, okay, to be literate. So whereas in Brazil, it is 94%. So it's still pretty high, but overall in your country, 5%, that still matters. And you're going to see most developed nations in that 97 to 99%, like really, really high. Almost everyone can read and write, at least at middle school, high school level. Okay. So you're going to do the same thing with life expectancy, birth rate, unemployment, with whatever you're developed. And then you're going to do the same thing for your underdeveloped. Okay. So you would take that third one listed here, whatever you chose. It doesn't have to be Cambodia, whatever you chose, less developed. You're going to list it on your chart. Again, those indicators again, and then research them. Make sure that you have a year for each one. So go ahead and pause this, give some time to work on that. And then I'm going to go over the very last part and wrap up this thing. So go ahead and pause this so you have time to finish, because these have to be done in order to do your comparison, in order to have your reflection. Okay. So these have to be done in order to compare then side by side. Okay. Once you're done with part 3, And again, that has to be done before you can do part 4. Then we kind of bring this all together. You need to have 2 to 3 sentences response for each question in task 4, reflecting on the information in task 3. So you're comparing the stats in task 3 to help come to conclusions in task 4. That's why it's really important to be done. So let's take a look at task 4, the reflection. And again, make sure, pause this and make sure that you've finished the 3 different countries, same indicators, showing the comparison. Okay. Compare and contrast the data you found for each country. According to your data, which country has the highest standard of living? Which has the lowest? Why? So remember, you're going to look and you're going to rank them. So whatever you put for underdeveloped, what's their GDP? And then go through rank. Which of your 3 countries, is it your developed, developing, or underdeveloped, has the highest GDP? You could do it with literacy rates. Who has the highest? Who has mid? Who has lowest? Ranking them 1, 2, 3. Life expectancy, birth rates, unemployment. Unemployment, remember the goal is to be lower. So the lower the unemployment, that would rank number 1. The higher the unemployment, that would rank, so first would be whoever has the lowest unemployment. Second would be mid. Whoever has the highest unemployment percentage, that would be 3rd place. Less desirable, lower standard of living. So according to your data, which country has the highest standard of living? Which has the lowest? Now, it's probably going to follow that your developed country has the highest standard of living, but what indicators show that? Not just GDP. Is it the life expectancy? Is it the literacy rate? Is it the birth rate? Is it a low unemployment? What other indicators show that? So give me one sentence for that. Which one has the lowest? Do they have super low literacy rates? Do they have lower GDP? Do they have really high unemployment rates? What indicators do they have that show or correlate with the standard of living? Then you move on to number 6, in retrospect. So again, you can pause between each question, okay? In retrospect, do you think your indicators were helpful in measuring the standard of living? Did they help give you more insight than just GDP, the average domestic product, the average production and income of people in that country? Do you feel like literacy rates helped you? Okay, yeah. Lower GDP, probably more people need than their kids to work, so therefore less go to school. So lower literacy because of lower income, because the family's struggling, they need more income, so they need the kids to work. Like those can go hand in hand. Higher literacy usually means well-off countries can afford to send kids to school because the parents are making enough money to support the basic needs of the family. So what indicators do you think are helpful in giving insight is what we're trying to say. Was anything surprising? Sometimes things are surprising. Maybe developing had a better stat than underdeveloped. Maybe life expectancy. Maybe you saw unemployment was actually low where you expected to be high. So was there one that kind of surprised you or maybe didn't fit the mold, contradicted the high standard of living or the low standard of living? Let's say you have high standard of living, but life expectancy is in the 60s. You're like, what the heck? Like, maybe something doesn't correlate. And then, so go tell me, a stat or a country, an indicator or a country that surprised you, 2 to 3 sentences. And then finally, what indicator do you think was most helpful besides GDP? So GDP is obviously the easy way to see it, right? You see the dollar signs. The higher the dollar signs, the higher the standard of living. Okay, and we kind of see that even just comparing Brazil and Australia. Okay. And whatever you put for underdeveloped, it will probably most definitely have a low GDP. But what other indicator was also most telling? Was it literacy? Was it unemployment? Was it life expectancy? Was it birth rate? What other indicator besides GDP do you feel like was the most insightful? So task 3 is very important. You must finish task 3 and then in order to compare. So you look at task 3 to help answer task 4. So that's why it's really important. And again, make sure that you're giving me numbers, years. So I need stats and I need year for each part of task 3. Okay. So just like we did together, I can't emphasize that enough because you will lose points. I need obviously a stat, but I also need a year. Okay. So, and we want it to be within 2 to 3 years as much as possible. Okay, as much as possible, current as possible. So 2022, 23, making sure it's as current as possible. When you are done with all that, then you will submit this for week 11, module 9, lesson 7. So standard of living, I'm looking at the lesson and recording page. So remember, this is where you can find the video for this. This is also where you can find the PowerPoints with the links that I've been using to help go through that you're seeing here on this PowerPoint. You can find this linked on the lesson and recording page, okay, for this week. So 3 things are going to be due by this Friday, okay? So 3 things, you can see them down here, okay? So in class, whether you have this class Wednesday or Thursday, the EverFis, those should have been done on Tuesday. Those should be done. If not, you need to finish them. And then finishing standard of living project, okay? So finishing, getting standard of living project done. All 3 are due Monday, okay? So that gives you Friday and that gives you Monday during those independent work times where if you have a little bit of EverFi, you need to finish up, or if you need to go and finish up parts of the standard living project, that you can do that. All 3 are due on Monday the 25th, okay? All right, couple of reminders. So make sure you finish this up. You can rewind this video. If you're watching this in class and you need to watch it again, you can go find it on the lesson recording page. Fast forward to any parts that you need. You can come see me on Friday for small group. Codes are listed right there. They're on the home page for any extra assistance that you might need. All right. You need to turn these in. All right. You need to turn these in. Part of doing 4th quarter correctly is staying on task with things, right? Staying on task, getting your assignments in. All right. Can anybody hear me, right? Please, please, please. Okay. Especially if you need to bring up your 3rd quarter grade. You can't obviously change that, but that means you need to get a high 4th quarter grade, right, to balance if you didn't pass 3rd quarter. So that semester grade can overall be really well. Okay, so one more review. We did the EverFis on Tuesday, keys to investing, investment game. All right, we started that even before spring break. So hopefully you had enough time before. Again, this is where if you use your time wisely in class, then you should be able to get 95% of work done in class. If you slack off, you know what I'm saying, and you are like Cartman and you just do what you want to do, then I don't want to hear that you're stressed and that you're behind because you didn't do what you're supposed to do. You need to use your time wisely in class, right? Fridays, Mondays, getting your work done, staying on top of it, not waiting till things close, okay? And that's everyone's responsibility. All right. If you have questions, you can email me. All right. Make sure that you get that in. And then one more reminder, this past Monday, the 18th, Life of a T-shirt was due. We completed that in class before spring break, right? And you can find those videos on the lesson recording pages for week 10. You can find part 2. We did half 1 week, and you can find part 1 on the week 9 page. Okay. You can find part 1 in that second video on week 9. Again, using your time wisely in class is so important. If you're not doing that, yes, you're going to get behind. But you are expected to not only come to class, you are expected to participate and use time wisely. And then that Friday, Monday, if you have a few things you need to finish up, you can come to small group and get that one-on-one assistance, or you can independently work, or you can use these videos to help you catch up. Okay? I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I know this video is kind of long, but pause it as you need. Get these sections done. All right. We'll see you later. Thank you so much.